I'm not going to open this video with the price chart. I'm going to open it with this.
A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard, terrible people.
3 American service members are dead. A supreme leader was killed in an airstrike, and explosions are being heard in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Tehran, Tel Aviv, and Beirut. Hundreds of thousands of people are stranded at airports across the Middle East because 41% of flights have been canceled. And the President of the United States, President Trump, has publicly said that this war will likely last 4 to 5 weeks.
Over the past 36 hours, the United States and its partners have launched Operation Epic Fury, one of the largest, most complex, most overwhelming military offensives the world has ever seen. Nobody's seen anything like it.
This is day 3 of Operation Epic Fury, and Bitcoin at the time of this recording is around $69,000. So I want to talk to you about what that actually means, not just for your portfolio, but for what Bitcoin is and what it was designed to do, and what this war is quietly testing in real time. So let's get into it. First off, let's make sure we're all working from the same set of facts, because the news cycle is moving fast and it's easy to lose the thread of what's going on. First, on February 28th, the United States and Israel launched a joint military campaign, you can say, against Iran, an attack called Operation Epic Fury. Within 24 hours, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who had led the country for 36 years, was killed, and all of his family and many of his military leaders killed in strikes targeting his command compound in Tehran. We are living through a once-in-a-generation geopolitical shock comparable to that of the start of World War III. Now, I remain optimistic that is not going to happen. It's not going to continue to escalate, but it very well may. Because upon being attacked, Iran retaliated immediately. They launched waves of missiles and drones at Israel, at the US military bases across the region as well, in Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. The US Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain was targeted. Dubai's Burj Al Arab Hotel, one of the most recognizable buildings in the world, was hit by debris. Jebel Ali Port, one of the busiest shipping hubs on the planet, was also struck. And as of right now, here's where the casualty count stands. 4 U.S. service members killed, over 550 people killed inside Iran, and deaths reported in the UAE, Kuwait, and Bahrain. And Iran has said clearly they will not negotiate. I see them as a sinking ship. And as they sink, they're reaching and grabbing for whoever and whatever they can as they're sinking. And that's why they've attacked so many nations, which really, ultimately, I believe is going to wipe them out faster, because now they've created so many more enemies. And as Trump put it, this campaign was designed to eliminate Iran's nuclear infrastructure and ballistic missile program. He said they can have no nuclear weapon program. And he said this elimination process, will last 4 to 5 weeks. He said the US will easily prevail. We have yet to see, but he has moved very fast and he does have a great track record so far. So I tend to believe him. But it's more complicated than it may seem, because we're not in silos, we're all connected. So in the same way this war is affecting already multiple markets, it's going to affect multiple nations. And as I was saying, I'm telling you all of this, I'm trying to lay context, because everything I'm about to say next about money, markets, and Bitcoin is only going to make sense if you understand the weight and gravity of what is actually happening on a geopolitical scale first. And here's something most financial YouTube channels or stations won't explain to you. Wars don't stay where they start, not geographically and not financially. Every major war since World War II has had a financial fingerprint, a set of transmission mechanisms, you could say, that carry the shock from the battlefield into your mortgage rate, into your grocery bill, to your investment accounts, how much you pay at the gas pump. So let me walk you through how that works, because right now, all of these mechanisms I just outlined are activated simultaneously. The first and most immediate one is in oil. Oil is up 7% in the last 48 hours. And here's what that actually means. Oil is the input cost for almost everything we do: food production, manufacturing, shipping, energy. Okay, it takes money to move and transport goods from one spot to another. And that price of gas gets calculated into the price we pay at the store. So it's not just going to affect us when we go fill our car with gas, though we're already seeing that, but it's going to affect every product at the store. It's going to cost more to run a factory. So it's effectively a tax on the entire economy, one that nobody voted for and nobody can easily avoid. We're stuck. And here's how the spike in oil prices affects the greater market and our portfolios and what's to come in the market. First off, oil spikes are inflationary. More inflation means the Federal Reserve has less room or no room to cut interest rates. Which brings me to the second mechanism, and that is that the Fed may be getting boxed in. Because before this war started, the Fed was already unlikely to cut rates at their March 18th meeting. Why? Because the US economy was running surprisingly hot. Manufacturing PMI just came in at 52.4, the strongest back-to-back expansion since 2022. So that data alone was enough to take a March rate cut off the table. But now, if we layer in this war situation, higher oil prices push inflation higher. And higher inflation means the Fed keeps rates elevated for longer. Higher rates for longer means tighter financial conditions across the board. And that means pressure on every risk asset, from equities to crypto. And the third mechanism is in gold and what it's telling us right now. Gold is surging towards all-time highs, up 2% just today, on top of a 23% rally over the past month. So when gold moves like this, it's not just a trade, it's a signal. It's the market's fear barometer, so to speak, saying people don't trust institutions. They don't trust their governments. Obviously, we're at war. And they don't trust currencies to protect their wealth right now. They want something real, something that's held value for 5,000 years, regardless which empire is winning or losing. So hold that thought, because we're going to come back to gold and gold's price in a minute. But okay, now let us talk about the conversation that I think should be happening on every financial channel right now. Bitcoin did not crash overnight. Let me say that again. Equity futures were pricing in a 2% plus crash when markets opened this morning. The world woke up this morning, Monday, to an active war, explosions in Dubai, US troops dying, and Bitcoin, which has been selling off with equities every time macro fear spikes, okay, and has spiked for the last 6 months, held. And actually, it pushed up towards $69,000 as of the time of my recording. And why? Well, the surface answer is that stocks recovered faster than feared. The NASDAQ ended up down only 0.1% instead of the 2% carnage that was being priced in overnight. So, risk assets broadly bounced in relief, and Bitcoin came along for the ride. But I want you to sit with a deeper question here, because I think something else might also be happening. The people who sell Bitcoin when tariff headlines drop, when Fed language turns hawkish or pessimistic, when a macro spreadsheet looks scary, those people are responding to financial system risk. They're treating Bitcoin like a leveraged tech stock, and they sell it for the same reason they'd sell their Nvidia stock. But the people who hold Bitcoin when bombs are literally dropping, that's a different calculation entirely. Those people aren't thinking about interest rate spreads, okay? They're thinking about what asset they can hold that no government can freeze, no border can stop, no central bank can print more of. They're thinking about a stateless, unseizable store of value that doesn't care which regime is in power, because it doesn't answer to any regime. So here's my thesis, okay? This war is exactly the use case Bitcoin was theoretically designed for. Think about it. The US dollar strengthened today. And yes, in the short term, The dollar always gets the safety bit. It's the world's reserve currency still. People run to it during chaos. But if we zoom out, the US, we know, is running a $36 trillion debt load. We're now in a shooting war that Trump says will last at least 4 to 5 weeks with escalation risk on multiple fronts. Oil is spiking, which pushes inflation higher, which makes the Fed's job harder, which puts pressure on the very bonds that back the dollar's credibility. Which brings us to the question, at what point does safety stop flowing into dollars and start flowing into something the US government can't print more of? What this war is quietly doing, okay, regardless of how it ends, which I hope it just ends fast, is running, okay? It's running the most important stress test Bitcoin has ever faced. It's not a stress test of price. It's a stress test of thesis, of premise, of its purpose. Is Bitcoin digital gold or is it just a leveraged tech bet? We have a scenario where for the first time, we have a real world environment, okay, of active war, dollar stress, oil shock, geopolitical fragmentation across 9 countries. That is exactly the environment Bitcoin was designed to be useful in. So let us keep pressing on because together we'll find out what it actually is. Or rather, let me correct that statement, how it's being treated. But first, let us take a step back and think and ask ourselves, what could Iran do next? What threat do we really face from Iran? It's a sinking state. Its political leaders have been decapitated. Because while we may be seeing missiles and airstrikes in the headlines in the news, we know at some point they're going to run out of those. They can't compete with the US. But Iran's real leverage is in places most people aren't looking. And some of it runs directly through the financial system your money lives on. Let's go through them. I'm talking about cyber. Iran has one of the most sophisticated state-sponsored cyber programs in the world. This isn't theoretical. They've previously conducted successful attacks on US bank infrastructure, on Saudi Aramco's oil operations, and on critical energy systems. A coordinated cyber attack on US financial infrastructure is something the Federal Reserve and Treasury have been wargaming for years. It's a known risk with a known playbook. So here's the Bitcoin connection that may exist that most people are not thinking about. Because if we're talking about what kind of attack could shake confidence in centralized financial systems, such as banks going dark, transactions freezing, clearinghouses disrupted, the argument for a decentralized asset that nobody can turn off becomes very different than it sounded last week. It suddenly sounds way more appealing. And this isn't me being dramatic, okay? This is the scenario that institutional risk managers think about. They're thinking about the potentials of what may happen. And that's how you hedge and protect yourself from an unknown future. So let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz. I keep coming back to this because I think it's the variable that controls everything else. About 20% of the world's global oil supply flows through that strait. Iran doesn't need to win this war militarily, so to speak, to cause enormous economic damage. They just need to make that waterway feel unsafe for long enough. Even the credible threat of closing it moves oil markets. An actual closure, even if for 2 weeks, would send oil prices to levels we haven't seen since the 2008 financial crisis. So yes, perhaps that's not a Bitcoin story at first glance. That's a global inflation shock story. But it becomes a Bitcoin story very quickly when you think about what sustained dollar credibility looks like in a world of $120 a barrel of oil. The proxy network. Iran didn't build a military. They built an empire of proxies. Hezbollah in Lebanon is already firing missiles at Israel. Iran-backed groups in Iraq have the capability to make US military bases in the region untenable, and Houthi forces in Yemen can disrupt Red Sea shipping. This isn't one war on one front. It could become 6 or 7 simultaneous wars, okay, war fronts that stretch US military and financial capacity for months, which I'm still not entirely too worried about because the US has the ability to print money and they may end up using this as an excuse. And then there's the China wild card, so to speak. And this one I think is worth paying close attention to because it's one of the least discussed and potentially the most consequential for your financial life. China has already evacuated over 300 nationals from Iran. They called for an emergency UN Security Council meeting. Their foreign minister has called the killing of Khamenei, okay, their leader, a grave violation of Iranian sovereignty. China and Iran have a deep economic relationship, oil purchases, infrastructure investment, and strategic alignment. If China decides this moment is the right time to accelerate the de-dollarization moves they've been building towards for years anyway, dumping US treasuries, expanding yuan denominated trade agreements with Gulf states, deepening the alternative financial rails they've been constructing, well, this could very well be a financial weapon more powerful than any missile Iran could have launched. It can just incentivize them to speed things up. Because de dollarization, we know, doesn't happen overnight. But wars have a way of accelerating slow trends very fast. So we have to wait and see how this war is being played, okay? Like a lever. How is it being played to get different countries' agendas accelerated? And if the dollar's role as the world reserve currency starts to erode, okay, even slightly, even at the margins, the asset that benefits most is the one that was designed to be nobody's currency and everybody's money. That is Bitcoin. But now I want to get into something practical. Okay, I want to paint for you three different scenarios of realities we may be walking into depending on how things play out and what they would mean for your finances. Okay, so scenario one would be where this 4 to 5 weeks of ongoing war, okay, to decapitate the current regime leaders and any last seedling of sentiment to continue their uranium enriching and nuclear weapon program, okay, where that gets removed. It gets degraded. At which point, okay, in this world case scenario, a successor to Khamenei, or how you say his name, Ayatollah, would emerge. And hopefully, this would be someone more practical, more pragmatic, someone willing to come to the table and negotiate more than the previous regime did. In this scenario, okay, the Strait of Hormuz would stay open. So we would have a scenario where oil prices would spike and then gradually they'd come back down as the market realizes supply isn't actually disrupted. Okay, so everyone can go back to business as normal. And in this scenario, equities would stabilize and Bitcoin would consolidate somewhere, okay, not as a predictor here, but likely in the $65,000 to $75,000 range. And in this world, okay, the thesis that Bitcoin's sell off, okay, was always a macro driven correction, not a failure of Bitcoin's fundamentals, would get validated. Institutional infrastructure would keep building, and the narrative would shift back to the halving cycle, although we know we've broken away from that. But ETF inflows would continue, and the strategic reserve conversation would also continue. World case scenario B, okay, or the second potential reality we're walking into, could be one, right, hypothetically, where the war expands beyond its projected timelines. Hezbollah would open a full second war front, and Iran backed groups in Iraq would make US bases, okay, operationally difficult. And in this world, we would see China begin making financial moves that create sustained pressure on dollar assets. They would use it as a use case, as an excuse to decouple, okay, to start breaking away faster from the US dollar. And in this second world case scenario, the Strait of Hormuz would see at least partial disruption, which is likely. And this could become a 3 to 6 month sustained crisis, not a 4 to 5 week war and done case scenario, as President Trump is saying, which once again, I do tend to believe may be the case because of how he has moved so far. He has been a quick problem solver and a quick negotiator. But in this world, okay, that I'm painting out for you, almost every risk asset would reprice lower over the medium term. But what I want you to take away from this second world case scenario I'm painting out for you is that in a prolonged war, with dollar stress, okay, rising oil costs, and geopolitical fragmentation, though it may also end up being a unification of nations coming together to fight against Iran. fight against evil. But okay, in this hypothetical case scenario, because I just want you to be aware of all possible case scenarios, Bitcoin's behavior relative to gold becomes the most important financial story of the decade. If Bitcoin correlates with gold in this scenario, the thesis transforms. And if it keeps correlating with the NASDAQ, the thesis gets its hardest test yet. So that is a potential case scenario. Okay, and the last possible case scenario is one where the regime collapses and Iran's surviving leadership cannot consolidate control. The country descends into an internal power struggle with multiple factions, some with access to significant military assets and no clear decision maker. This is the scenario that financial models haven't priced because it's the hardest to price. Markets hate uncertainty more than they hate conflict. A known enemy with a known playbook is manageable. You can calculate around it. But a leaderless Iran with nuclear infrastructure, okay, proxy networks across the region, and no one in charge of the off switch, that's a different kind of risk entirely. And the variable that's going to tell us, okay, what happens next, what path we're on, is in what happens to the Strait of Hormuz, not the headlines, not the casualty count, okay, not Trump's press conferences. It's what happens to the Strait of Hormuz. If it stays open and oil flows continue, financial markets can absorb this war over time. If it closes, though, or even if credible disruption becomes persistent, the oil shock rewrites every financial forecast for 2026 and forces every central bank in the world to respond. That's the signal, and watch it like a hawk. That said, I want us to zoom out from the war, step away from the war for a moment, and show you what's happening in Bitcoin's underlying structure. Because the on-chain data tells us a story that price doesn't. Right now, long-term Bitcoin holders, okay, wallets that have held for 365 days or more, have nearly stopped selling. Their net selling position dropped 87% between February 5th and March 1st. These are people who lived through the 2022 bear market, is what this means. People who lived through COVID, who bought Bitcoin when nobody was watching. They are not moving. And ETF inflows just snapped a 5-week outflow streak, over 1 billion in net inflows across 3 consecutive days. So most likely, these are financial advisors and retail clients re-entering, not sovereign wealth funds making conviction calls in the middle of a war. But the direction of the trend matters. The bleeding has stopped. And here's the institutional infrastructure story that gets lost in the noise. Citi, okay, with roughly 30 billion in assets under custody, announced plans to launch institutional-grade Bitcoin custody in 2026 this year, integrating traditional tax reporting, compliance auditing, and API connectivity. They announced this while prices were falling and the war was just starting. The infrastructure is being built during the storm, not after it clears. And that's what conviction looks like from the institutional side. Not buying, but building the rails because they believe it's the future. So as we close out, here's where I land on what's going on. I started this video by telling you I wouldn't open with a price chart, okay? And I'm gonna close the same way because the most important thing happening right now isn't Bitcoin at $69,000 or $65,000 or whatever Bitcoin does tomorrow. The most important thing is that Bitcoin is being asked for the first time in a real world shooting war with dollar stress, oil shocks, cyber risk, and geopolitical fragmentation across 9 countries. The question it has always had to answer: digital gold, or is it a leveraged tech bet? We know what it really is, okay? But in terms of how it's been understood and treated by all the new adopters, okay? That answer will unfold over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I think that how Bitcoin behaves during this war will tell us more about what it actually is. The answer will unfold over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And I think, okay, how Bitcoin behaves during this war will tell us a little bit more about how the world is receiving Bitcoin and where they are on their educational curve. So watch 3 signals, okay? 3 things. That's what I want you to take away from today's video. Watch and see what happens with the Strait of Hormuz. Okay. Watch and see what happens with the gold to Bitcoin ratio and whether the equity correlation holds or breaks. Those three signals will tell you more than any pundit. But as always, this is not financial advice. It's just what I'm observing in the market based off of all my education and background and constant research. I am not a trained financial advisor, but I am someone who follows this closely and thinks you should know and tries to deliver what is going on in a way you could understand. So stay safe out there, stay away wherever you live, wherever you are in the world, stay away from any American military bases. Make sure you have enough water, batteries, solar batteries. I just bought some. And if you can, I would encourage you to look to relocate. I'm going to say it. Look to relocate somewhere safe. Okay, because when things get challenging and hard, it's the cities, it's the inner city that gets affected the most. We saw that in Austin. I didn't cover it in today's video, but we saw it in Austin over the weekend by a Muslim. Okay, he had the t shirt, I forget what it was written on it, but he openly started shooting at a bar in Austin. Okay, so that happened very close to us. And thankfully, I'm a homebody. I don't want to go out. So I was safe, but I think that we are moving into very troubling, uncertain times. I ultimately believe that good prevails, good wins. But right now, we have a real evil power in the world sinking. And as they're sinking, they're grabbing whatever they can to come down with them. So, this war, I believe, will be over sooner than later. But in the meantime, it's war and we have to be safe. So, I wish you safety. I wish you don't panic, but I wish you prepare. Okay. And if you can move to somewhere away from a big city that has your own water source and you have access to a local farmer's market, I would encourage you to consider that just until the dust settles, especially now. This is separate news. I didn't cover it either, but we know that Anthropic refused to let the US military use its AI model because we know it was used to capture Maduro in Venezuela. So they refused to allow their model to be used in war. So while that is a good thing, quote unquote, it's not a good thing because guess who got the contract? OpenAI, Sam Altman. I don't think that's a good thing because the model still hallucinates. And there have been multiple cases, which I post on my X account, which I would encourage you to follow me on X, which is linked below. So now that we know AI is officially being used in war, you only have to connect the dots to realize what could happen in the near future. So I would feel bad if I didn't say it. So I'm not trying to cause panic, but I would recommend you create a community with your closest friends and family members and look to move away from big cities and learn to figure out how you can become self-sustaining because power grids can be attacked. We know that's one of Iran's strongest suits. Okay, they've done it in the past. So power grids could go down. How fast and how long could you survive without electricity or heating, cooling, or your own food or your own water? So these are things to really think about. Anyway, I love you guys so much, and I'll be back here tomorrow. Okay, take care.